They showed up on my dirt road like they owned the place, black vests, shiny badges, radios crackling. At first glance, you'd think they were law enforcement on a mission. But I've seen real operators. I've served with men who carried authority in their presence, not in a costume. And the moment these guys barked their first order, I knew something was off. They weren't cops. They weren't military. They were imposters sent by the HOA, trying to scare me off the land I built with my bare hands. What they didn't know: I'm a Green Beret. And intimidation doesn't work on me. It was early morning, the kind of crisp silence that only a wide stretch of land can give you. My ranch was waking up, the horses were restless, the dogs were circling near the fence line, and the smell of coffee drifted from the porch where I stood, mug in hand. For a soldier who'd spent years in the field, mornings like this were more than routine, they were a reward. Out here, freedom had a sound. That sound was broken by the low rumble of engines. At first, I thought it was just a delivery truck on the wrong road. But as the dust cloud rolled closer, I saw the shape of two black SUVs pulling up slow, deliberate, like they were staging a scene out of some cop show. My gut tightened. Out here, unannounced visitors never mean good news. They parked just outside my gate. Doors opened in unison. Out stepped four men, all in black tactical vests with bold letters that read enforcement. Their uniforms looked official, but not polished. Their badges caught the sun, but from where I stood, they glared like cheap tin. They had radios clipped to their shoulders, but the chatter I heard wasn't police protocol. It was disorganized, nervous. One of them, the one who looked like he wanted to be in charge, shouted across the fence. "Sir, this is a compliance check. We're here under authority of your homeowners association." I almost laughed. Compliance check? With tactical vests? On my land? I set my coffee mug down, stepped off the porch, and walked slow toward the gate. Years of Special Forces training had taught me one thing above all else: never let adrenaline control the moment. Let them think you're calm, let them underestimate you. Up close, their costumes looked even cheaper. Their patches didn't match, the Velcro was peeling, and the so-called badges had spelling errors. Spelling errors. Real law enforcement doesn't have typos printed on their shields. The leader puffed his chest out. "You're in violation of several codes. According to the HOA, your structures and equipment are not permitted here. We have the right to inspect, and if necessary, seize property." That's when I realized what was happening. This wasn't law enforcement. This was theater. A bad one. The HOA had sent its own little squad of wannabes, dressing them up like cops to put fear in my heart. They didn't know fear wasn't something I carried anymore. I left it behind a long time ago, in places far more dangerous than this ranch. I asked for ID. They flashed wallets so fast I couldn't even see the details. One of them angled it toward me, like a magician showing a card trick. I caught a glimpse, the laminate was peeling, the lettering looked like it had been printed at home. "Fake." "Sir, we're going to need you to step aside and let us enter," the leader barked, trying to sound commanding. The dogs were barking now, pacing along the fence, sensing the tension. My neighbors had started to peek from their porches down the road, unsure of what was happening. To them, it probably looked like a raid, armed men at my gate, shouting legal words, waving papers. And that's exactly what the HOA wanted. Fear by spectacle. But here's the truth: intimidation only works if the target believes in it. And I wasn't buying the show. I leaned against the gate, folded my arms, and said in the calmest voice I could manage, "If you're law enforcement, then you won't mind me calling the sheriff to verify." The leader stiffened. The other three exchanged nervous glances. They weren't ready for pushback. They were used to homeowners folding under pressure, handing over keys, signing away rights. Not this time. I could see the frustration building in his face. He wasn't used to someone looking him in the eye without flinching. He doubled down, raising his voice. "We have full authority under civil code. Step aside now, or we'll place you under arrest for obstruction." That was the moment I almost smiled. Arrest? These clowns couldn't even spell authority right on their badges, and they thought they were going to put cuffs on me? Inside, though, I stayed locked in. This wasn't funny, it was dangerous. These weren't actors on a stage, they were desperate people with just enough costume to fool the wrong neighbor, maybe even provoke violence. That made them a threat. And as someone who had faced real threats in real war zones, I knew exactly how to deal with them: patience, control, and precision. So I stood there, steady, letting silence eat at their confidence. Letting them feel the weight of my calm stare. In that moment, the ranch wasn't just land. It was a battlefield. And I wasn't about to surrender a single inch. The man in front, the so-called commander of this fake task force, held up a clipboard like it was a weapon. The paper flapped in the breeze, stamped with an official-looking seal that, on closer glance, was nothing more than a cheap black and white printout. He jabbed his finger at it like he was making the final argument in a courtroom. "This document proves you're in violation of HOA bylaws," he said, raising his voice so the neighbors could hear. "You've got unauthorized structures, unapproved equipment, and multiple infractions that give us the right to remove property immediately." I didn't even bother to look down at the paper. Theatrics, all of it. What he really wanted wasn't compliance, it was control. That's how HOAs work when they get drunk on power. It starts small: a letter about your grass being too long, a fine for your fence being an inch too high. Then it escalates. Pretty soon, they're not just telling you how to paint your mailbox, they're trying to dictate how you live your life, what you own, and in my case, whether I had the right to keep my ranch the way I built it. But this? Dressing up hired goons like cops? That wasn't just overreach. That was a declaration of war. I scanned their faces as they tried to play their roles. One guy's vest hung lopsided, like he hadn't even tightened the straps. Another had his boots unlaced. The third was holding his radio upside down, pretending to press buttons that weren't even there. These weren't trained enforcers. They were men looking for easy money, emboldened by the HOA's checkbook and arrogance. The leader kept going, louder now, sensing he was losing ground. "You have until the end of the day to comply. If you don't, the HOA reserves the right to seize this land and auction it off to recover unpaid fines." There it was, the real motive. Not compliance. Not safety. Money. They wanted my ranch. I took a step closer to the gate, close enough to see the sweat forming under his fake badge. Calm as a priest, I asked, "How much did they promise you?" The question caught him off guard. He stammered. His lips pressed tight, but the crack in his mask was there. He hadn't expected resistance, and he sure hadn't expected someone to call out the corruption so plainly. The dogs barked louder, pacing along the fence. My neighbors whispered among themselves, phones out, recording the scene. "Good. Let them see. Let there be witnesses." "You're obstructing an investigation," he shouted, but his voice had lost its edge. He shoved the clipboard at me, jabbing a finger toward the so-called violations. I finally glanced at the paper. Half the infractions were laughable. One line read, "Unregistered utility structure, violation of Property Code Section 4. My utility shed? Built with my own hands, approved years ago." Another read, "Unauthorized heavy equipment on site." Translation, my tractor. The same one that had been parked out back since I bought the land. The HOA wasn't just making rules up, they were weaponizing paperwork. False violations, fake fines, bogus codes, designed to bury me in debt or force me to sell. I looked back at him and said, steady as steel, "You know none of this will hold up in court. You're bluffing." For a split second, he broke character. His jaw twitched. He glanced back at the others, as if searching for backup. But the others weren't much help. One was wiping sweat from his forehead, another kept shifting from foot to foot like a nervous rookie. That's when I saw it clearly: the HOA didn't just send these men to enforce rules. They sent them to intimidate, to stage a show. A fake raid, complete with costumes and props, hoping I'd fold under pressure. But here's the problem with shows, they fall apart under scrutiny. And I was staring straight through their script. The leader tried one last push, slamming his clipboard against the fence. If you don't comply, you'll regret it. We'll take everything. I leaned in, close enough that only he could hear me. My voice dropped to a whisper. Son, I've been trained to stand my ground against enemies far more dangerous than you. You can wear the costume, you can wave the paper, but you're not law enforcement. And if you keep pretending to be, you're going to find out what real law does to imposters. His face drained of color. Behind him, one of the neighbors shouted, "Sheriff's on the way." Apparently someone had already called. The crowd around us thickened, phones out, recording every second. The spectacle the HOA wanted to use against me was now being turned against them. The leader swallowed hard, but tried to recover, raising his voice again, "Stay back. This is an active investigation." But it was too late. The cracks in their performance were showing, and everyone could see it. The HOA's dirty game had just been exposed for what it was, not law, not authority, but a cheap intimidation tactic. And as I stood there, calm and unshaken, I realized something: they hadn't come to enforce rules. They had come to steal. And I was about to show them just how badly they had underestimated their target. The air had shifted. The imposters came here expecting obedience, maybe even fear. Instead, they were standing at my gate, their fake authority unraveling in front of neighbors who now saw them for what they really were: frauds. But even cornered animals can be dangerous. And these men were desperate enough to double down. The so-called leader puffed out his chest and tried again, this time louder, angrier. "Last warning. Step aside or you'll be detained for obstruction of justice." The words were hollow. They had no weight, no authority. But what made them dangerous was that they believed they could still bluff their way through. A desperate liar is unpredictable. I stayed still, one hand resting lightly on the gate. Inside, I was focused, heart steady, breathing calm. I'd been in worse standoffs before, with enemies who weren't just pretending to have power but actually had weapons, numbers, and the will to use them. Compared to that, this was theater. Dangerous theater, but theater nonetheless. "Detain me?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "With what? Your fake badges or your fake IDs?" That hit him hard. His jaw clenched, his hand twitched at the cuffs hanging off his belt. Not police-issue cuffs, cheap knockoffs. Plastic glint instead of steel. The other three shifted uncomfortably. Their eyes darted around to the growing group of neighbors recording on their phones. They weren't ready for an audience. They weren't ready for a man who didn't play his part in their intimidation act. I leaned a little closer, still calm, voice steady. "You're not law enforcement. You're not here for justice. You're trespassing on my land, and you're impersonating officers. That's a felony. You want to keep digging this hole?" The silence that followed was heavy. For a moment, the only sound was my dogs barking, their deep growls vibrating through the air like warning drums. The leader tried again, but his voice cracked this time. You don't understand the seriousness of your violations. The HOA. The HOA doesn't write laws," I cut him off. "And they sure as hell don't issue badges." That drew a chuckle from one of my neighbors in the crowd. Others murmured in agreement. The fake cops could feel the tide turning. They came to intimidate me in isolation, but now they were outnumbered, their authority questioned in public. Still, they weren't ready to back down. One of the imposters stepped forward, younger than the others, probably the most reckless of the group. He slapped his hand on the gate and barked. "Open it! We're coming in whether you like it or not." I turned my eyes to him, calm, unblinking, the way I'd stared down threats in places these men couldn't even find on a map. My voice dropped low, controlled, like the calm before a storm. "Step onto this land without a real warrant, and you won't just answer to me, you'll answer to the sheriff when he gets here. And trust me, son, you don't want that on your record." He froze. I could see it in his eyes, the moment of doubt, the crack in his resolve. He looked back at the leader, who gave him nothing but a frustrated scowl. Their little script was falling apart. And me? I wasn't moving an inch. That's the thing about standing your ground, it's not about yelling louder or looking tougher. It's about control. Control of your breath, your voice, your presence. You project calm, and the storm breaks over you instead of through you. I'd learned that lesson halfway across the world, standing in a marketplace surrounded by people who wanted me gone. One wrong move, one flash of fear, and the whole place would have erupted. But calm? Calm changes the game. Calm forces the other side to question themselves. So I used it here, on my own soil, against a different kind of enemy. The leader finally snapped, slamming his clipboard against his thigh. You think you're untouchable, huh? You think this land makes you above the rules? I didn't flinch. No. I think this land makes me free. And freedom means no HOA thug gets to dress up like a cop and steal it from me. The crowd murmured louder now. Some clapped. Others shouted words of encouragement. The impostors weren't just losing control of me, they were losing control of the entire scene. That's when I saw the first flicker of fear in the leader's eyes. He realized what was happening, his fake authority was collapsing, and mine, the authority of calm defiance, of truth, of real strength, was taking its place. The impostors shifted again, clearly debating their next move. They could push harder, risk crossing a line they couldn't come back from. Or they could retreat and admit defeat. Either way, they were losing. And me? I stayed steady, grounded, unshaken. My stance told them everything they needed to know. I wasn't moving. Not an inch. Because this was more than land. This was about principle. This was about standing up to fraud, to intimidation, to cowardice hiding behind a cheap costume. And I wasn't going to let them win. Not today. Not ever. The silence didn't last. Desperation never does. The impostors had been losing ground with every word I spoke, every second that passed. Their fake authority was crumbling, and the crowd's murmurs were no longer whispers, they were open doubts, quiet laughter, even ridicule. Nothing cuts through a bully's act faster than being exposed in front of witnesses. That's when one of them snapped. The youngest, the one who had slapped his hand on my gate earlier, suddenly lunged forward and rattled the chain link. His voice cracked with forced bravado. Enough talking. Open this gate now, or we'll put you in cuffs. The leader seized the moment, desperate to salvage control. He raised his voice, pointing at me like a drill sergeant trying to bark courage into a shaky recruit. You are officially under arrest for obstruction. Step aside. The crowd gasped. Some of my neighbors shouted protests. The dogs went wild, claws scratching at the dirt, barking with the kind of primal fury that warned, this is not your ground to claim. I didn't flinch. Instead, I let a small smile creep across my face, not out of arrogance, but because I had seen this exact play before. In combat zones, in interrogation rooms, in hostile checkpoints across the globe, I had seen men puff themselves up when they were seconds from collapse. This was no different. You're going to arrest me? I asked, calm as stone. Show me your warrant. Show me your jurisdiction. Show me anything real that proves you're not just four guys in costumes trespassing on my land. They had nothing. But desperation makes fools brave. The younger one unclipped his fake cuffs, plastic gleaming cheap in the morning sun, and stepped forward like he was going to push past the gate. The leader barked. Cuff him now. Don't let him resist. That's when I moved. Not aggressively, not violently, but with the kind of precision that only comes from years of training. I stepped into the gate, squared my shoulders, and locked eyes with the one holding the cuffs. My voice dropped to a low growl, the kind you don't hear often but never forget once you do. Take one more step, and you'll regret it. I promise you that. The kid froze. His hand trembled, the cuffs dangling loosely. He wasn't trained for pushback. He was trained for compliance, for easy victories, for soft targets. And I wasn't soft. The leader, frustrated, grabbed the clipboard and shoved it toward me through the fence, as if slapping me with paper would change the outcome. I caught it midair with one hand, yanked it forward, and let it drop to the dirt between us. The cheap seal smeared against the dust. "Your paperwork is trash," I said flatly. "And so is this act." The neighbors erupted, some laughed openly, others shouted, "Call the sheriff," and frauds. Phones angled higher, recording every second. The impostor's performance was collapsing live, and there was no recovering from it. That's when things turned physical. The leader, red-faced and sweating, suddenly reached through the gate and grabbed my arm. It was a mistake. A big one. In less than a second, instinct took over. I pivoted, twisted my wrist free using a simple counter hold, and stepped back just enough to show I could do far more if I wanted. I didn't strike. I didn't escalate beyond what was necessary. But the message was clear: don't touch me again. The crowd roared, a mix of cheers and gasps. The impostors stepped back, suddenly realizing they weren't the ones in control anymore. Their intimidation had backfired. They looked less like law enforcement and more like cornered criminals caught mid-scam. The younger one muttered under his breath, "This isn't worth it," but the leader hissed at him to stay in line. I caught it all. Their unity was breaking apart, just like their plan. "You think this is over?" the leader shouted, voice cracking. "You'll regret crossing the HOA." I shook my head slowly, my voice calm, even amused. "No. What you're going to regret is pretending to be something you're not. Impersonating law enforcement? That's not a fine. That's a felony. And I'm sure the sheriff will be interested in meeting you." At the mention of sheriff, their faces went pale. The crowd picked up the word like a chant. "Sheriff! Sheriff! Sheriff!" The leader tried to regain control, waving his arms at the neighbors. "Stop recording! This is official business." But nobody listened. Phones stayed raised. The impostors were trapped in their own failed performance, and every second that passed dragged them deeper into exposure. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to posture. All I had to do was stand steady, unmoved, letting them crumble under the weight of their own lies. That's the thing about real strength: it doesn't shout. It doesn't flail. It simply stands, and everything false collapses against it. The impostors backed off a step, huddling together, whispering like kids caught cheating on a test. They knew they were running out of time. The sirens weren't here yet, but everyone knew they were coming. And when they arrived, these four weren't going to look like officers. They were going to look like criminals. As I leaned against my gate, calm and unshaken, I knew one thing: the storm wasn't over. But I was ready. Because this wasn't just about my ranch anymore. It was about showing everyone, neighbors, friends, and even the HOA, that when you try to steal from a Green Beret, you don't just lose the fight. You lose everything. The tension hung in the air like a taut wire ready to snap. My neighbors stood shoulder to shoulder now, phones raised, eyes locked on the impostors who had just fumbled their last card. The fake cuffs dangled uselessly, their leader's bravado evaporating. And then it came, the distant wail of sirens. Low at first, then growing louder, rolling down the dirt road like thunder announcing a storm. The impostors froze. Their tough guy act drained from their faces faster than color leaving a corpse. They knew those sirens weren't for me. They were for them. The crowd erupted in cheers, clapping, whistling, shouting, finally, and here comes the real law. Even my dogs stopped barking and tilted their heads, ears perked like they too sensed the shift. I folded my arms, leaning against my gate, calm as ever. I had waited patiently for this moment, because I knew the truth was about to walk onto this stage, wearing a real badge. A sheriff's SUV screeched to a halt at the end of my driveway, dust pluming up behind it. Two deputies stepped out first, hands on their holsters, eyes sharp. Then, the county sheriff himself climbed out, broad-shouldered, sun-weathered, a man whose presence carried the kind of authority these impostors could never fake. The crowd went silent as the sheriff strode forward, boots crunching gravel, his hand resting casually on his belt. His eyes scanned the scene, the neighbors, the cameras, the fake uniforms, the clipboard lying in the dirt. "What in God's name is going on here?" he asked, voice steady but edged with suspicion. The impostor leader scrambled forward, puffing his chest back up as if he still had a chance. "Sheriff! Glad you're here. We've got a homeowner resisting an HOA enforcement action. He..." "Stop! One word." That's all it took from the sheriff. His voice cut sharper than any blade. The impostor froze mid-sentence. The sheriff looked him up and down, the mismatched tactical vest, the cheap badge pinned crookedly, the flimsy cuffs. He squinted. "Funny. I don't recognize you. And I know every deputy in this county. You want to explain who you're supposed to be?" The leader stammered, "We're with HOA Compliance Enforcement. Acting under authority of..." The sheriff barked a laugh so sharp it startled even the deputies. "HOA Compliance Enforcement? Son, that's not a thing. Not in my county. Not anywhere in this state." The crowd burst into laughter, jeers flying. "Told you so. Frauds! Get 'em out of here." I stepped forward then, calm but deliberate. "Sheriff, they showed up at my gate this morning, claimed they had the right to search my property. Tried to cuff me in front of witnesses. You've got it all on camera." I gestured toward the neighbors, phone still rolling. The sheriff's face darkened. He turned to his deputies. "Take their names. Check their IDs. If they're carrying weapons, secure them." The impostors panicked. The younger one blurted, "We were just following orders." The leader spun on him, whispering harshly, "Shut up." But it was too late. Their cracks had split wide open. One deputy stepped up to the leader. "Sir, do you have a badge number? A department ID? Anything?" The impostor's hand hovered near his vest, but there was nothing there. No badge, no number, no credentials. Just cheap plastic and a stitched patch that looked like it came from a surplus store. The sheriff leaned closer, his voice low but cutting. "Impersonating law enforcement is a felony in this state. You understand that? You understand the hole you've dug for yourself?" The leader tried to protest. "We were just enforcing HOA bylaws." The sheriff snapped. "HOA bylaws don't give you the right to impersonate my office. They don't give you the right to detain, to cuff, or to threaten homeowners. What you've done here isn't enforcement. It's fraud. And fraud is a crime." The crowd cheered. Some clapped, some whistled, some shouted, "Lock them up." The deputies moved in, pulling zip ties from their belts. The impostors' faces drained pale. The leader raised his hands, muttering excuses, but the cuffs clicked shut behind his back. One by one, they were restrained, the fake tough guys now standing helpless in front of the same neighbors they had tried to intimidate. I bent down, picked up the dusty clipboard, and handed it to the sheriff. "Here's the paperwork they tried to use. Looks official at first glance, but it's nonsense. Wrong seals, misspelled words, no signatures." The sheriff flipped through it, shaking his head. "Looks like something printed off the internet by a fool. This'll go straight to evidence." The neighbors laughed again. Someone shouted, "Hope the HOA reimburses your printer ink." The whole road buzzed with relief, vindication, even joy. The sheriff turned back to me, his face softening. "You handled this well. Most folks would have panicked. Could have gone bad fast." I shrugged lightly. "I've dealt with worse. Overseas. These guys weren't exactly special forces material." The sheriff cracked a grin. "That's putting it lightly." He glanced at the crowd. "All right, folks, show's over. Appreciate the footage. If you'll send copies to my office, we'll make sure it all goes on record." This'll help the DA nail the case. Phones buzzed as neighbors promised to share everything. Some even fist bumped me through the fence, whispering thanks. As the imposters were led away, heads hung low, I called out one last thing to them. You came onto my land pretending to be men you're not. Next time you try that on anyone, remember today. Remember how it ended. They didn't answer. They couldn't. The sheriff's SUV pulled away with the imposters inside, dust trailing behind. The crowd slowly dispersed, but the story was already racing ahead, whispered between neighbors, uploaded to Facebook, texted across town. I stood there, dogs at my side, the sun higher now in the sky. Calm, steady, unshaken. Because justice had walked through that gate. And when justice shows up, pretenders fall. The dust was still settling when the sheriff's SUV disappeared down the road, carrying the imposters away. My neighbors lingered at the fence, some still recording, some buzzing with disbelief at what they had just witnessed. I stood there quietly for a moment, letting it all sink in. The so-called HOA cops had swaggered up my driveway full of threats and fake authority, and left in the back of a squad car like the criminals they were. One of my neighbors, old Mr. Jenkins, limped up with his cane and tipped his hat. Son, I've lived in this county 70 years. Never thought I'd see the day an HOA tried to play police. You handled it better than anyone could have. I nodded, grateful but firm. Wasn't about handling. It was about standing my ground. If they'd gotten away with it once, they'd have tried again, on me, on you, on anyone they thought couldn't fight back. His eyes softened. Well, they sure as hell picked the wrong man this time. Laughter rippled through the neighbors who overheard. Phones dinged and buzzed, videos were already making the rounds on social media. A few folks shouted from down the road. Check Facebook. You're trending already. The HOA's gonna hate this. And sure enough, within hours, the clips of the imposters being unmasked were everywhere. Grainy phone footage of their fake badges, the sheriff's cutting words, the crowd cheering, it all spread like wildfire. By the afternoon, local news crews had picked it up. By nightfall, the HOA board couldn't deny what everyone already knew, their compliance officers had been nothing more than costume thugs. I sat on my porch as the sun set, coffee in hand, dogs resting at my boots, watching headlights slow as cars passed by. Folks honked, waved, even pulled over just to shake my hand. Some thanked me for standing up. Others admitted they'd been too scared to fight back against HOA intimidation before. But now? They weren't scared anymore. The sheriff called me personally the next morning. They're facing charges for impersonating law enforcement, trespassing, attempted unlawful detainment, and a laundry list of other crimes. DA's gonna have fun with this one. Honestly, you probably saved a lot of folks a lot of grief. I thanked him, but deep down, I knew this wasn't about thanks. It was about principle. My land, my freedom, my dignity, no HOA, no group of wannabe enforcers, was going to take that away. Not while I drew breath. A week later, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. They expected quiet damage control. Instead, dozens of homeowners showed up, armed not with fake badges, but with anger, with unity, with proof that their so-called leaders had crossed a line. Faces red, voices sharp, they demanded resignations. And one by one, the board folded under the weight of the backlash. For the first time in years, the HOA was broken. The fear they'd ruled with was gone. But as for me, I didn't attend that meeting. I didn't need to. My fight was already won. I stayed on my porch, boots up, sipping black coffee while the morning breeze carried the faint sound of neighbors cheering from the clubhouse down the road. Later, a young couple from 2 houses over came by with a pie their kids had baked. They looked nervous, as if I might not accept it. We just wanted to say thank you, the wife said softly. They tried to fine us once for having a swing set in the backyard. We couldn't afford to fight them. But after what you did, we don't feel alone anymore. Her husband added, you showed everyone what they really are. That matters. I accepted the pie with a smile. All I did was what anyone should do, tell bullies they don't run this place. Not my land, not our community. As they left, their kids waving shyly, I realized something. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all of us. A neighborhood no longer under the thumb of a corrupt board. A community reminded that courage spreads just as fast as fear. And that night, as the stars stretched across the sky and the land lay quiet again, I leaned back in my chair and let a simple truth settle deep in my bones. They had come to take what wasn't theirs. They left in chains instead. And me? I didn't just keep my land. I kept my freedom. Because when fake cops show up at a Green Beret's ranch, the only thing they take home is regret. The morning after the arrests, the neighborhood was buzzing like a hive struck with a stick. Word traveled fast in small towns, but this wasn't just gossip, it was scandal. The HOA, once feared and untouchable, had been dragged into the sunlight for everyone to see. At the local diner, folks leaned over steaming mugs of coffee, whispering, shaking their heads. "Did you see those clowns in fake badges?" one man asked. Another replied, "Saw it? My nephew's TikTok of it's got 500,000 views already." Laughter rippled through the booths. By lunchtime, the story had made the local paper's front page. A grainy photo of the impostors in zip ties, heads hung low, sat above the bold headline, "HOA enforcers arrested for impersonating police." The board tried to save face. They issued a carefully worded statement claiming misunderstanding and independent contractors. But the people weren't buying it. Homeowners were furious that their dues had funded this madness, furious that intimidation had been passed off as compliance. The sheriff went live on the evening news. These individuals were not law enforcement officers, he said firmly. They had no legal authority to detain, threaten, or trespass. Charges have been filed, and more may follow as we investigate the HOA's involvement. That was the nail in the coffin. Suddenly, families who had been too scared to speak up came forward. Stories poured in, bogus fines for lawn decorations, threats over paint colors, harassment over parked trucks. It wasn't just me anymore. It was everyone. A week later, the county courthouse overflowed with angry residents demanding answers. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing, microphones shoved into faces. A woman shouted, "They fined me for planting tomatoes in my front yard." Another man thundered, "They threatened to tow my disabled son's van." The HOA board members sat at the front of the room, sweating under the fluorescent lights. Their smug superiority had evaporated. One by one, homeowners demanded resignations. And when the sheriff's investigator revealed that HOA funds had been used to pay the fake enforcers, the crowd erupted. "You used our money for this? Resign now. Criminals in suits, that's all you are." By the end of the night, half the board had quit on the spot. The others were already facing lawsuits. The so-called untouchable HOA was falling apart faster than anyone thought possible. Meanwhile, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Friends, reporters, even veterans I'd served with called me. Some joked, only you could turn a standoff into a viral takedown. Others were dead serious. "Brother, you reminded people that standing firm matters. That's leadership." The thing was, I hadn't asked for any of this. I wasn't chasing headlines or revenge. I just wanted my ranch, my peace, my freedom. But somehow, this small act of standing my ground had lit a fire bigger than me. At the grocery store, strangers patted my back. At the post office, folks nodded with respect. Kids waved at me as if I were some local legend. And while I appreciated it, I kept my answer the same every time. I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just refused to bow. But deep down, I knew the truth. Most people never push back. Most people don't know how. Maybe my training gave me the edge. Maybe my stubborn streak carried me through. Either way, people saw it, and now they felt braver themselves. That evening, I walked the fence line as the sun dipped below the horizon, the land glowing gold. My dogs padded along beside me, tails wagging, calm now that the chaos had passed. I thought about the impostors, sitting in jail cells, stripped of their costumes. I thought about the HOA, crumbling under the weight of its own corruption. And I thought about my neighbors, ordinary folks who finally realized they weren't powerless. The land beneath my boots felt solid, unshakable. It wasn't just mine anymore, it was a symbol. A line in the sand no one had the right to cross. And as I reached the porch, watching fireflies flicker in the dusk, I knew one thing for certain. The HOA had tried to scare me into surrender. Instead, they'd sparked their own downfall. Because fear may silence a man for a while. But courage echoes. And this time, the echo was louder than ever. Weeks passed, but the echoes of that day never faded. The story of the HOA's fake cops had gone from neighborhood whispers to county headlines to something much bigger. Videos of their arrest had spread across social media like wildfire, reaching millions who shook their heads at the absurdity and cheered at the justice. For the first time in years, the HOA wasn't feared. It was a joke. Late-night hosts cracked jokes about homeowner SWAT teams. Memes flooded the internet with pictures of cheap vests and toy badges. What had once been a symbol of intimidation was now reduced to punchlines. And behind the humor was something deeper, outrage that this had been allowed to happen at all. My neighbors walked a little taller now. The young couple with the swing set in their backyard? They rebuilt it, brighter and stronger, daring anyone to complain. The family with the tomato garden planted twice as much. Even old Mr. Jenkins put a rocking chair out on his front lawn, chuckling when he told me, "Let's see them find me for enjoying the sunset." Fear had been replaced by defiance. And defiance had been replaced by pride. One afternoon, the sheriff stopped by my ranch. He didn't come in uniform this time, just jeans, boots, and a baseball cap. He leaned against the fence, looking out over the pasture. "You know," he said, "I've been in law enforcement 25 years. Seen a lot of scams, a lot of crooks. But I've never seen anything like this. Whole board dressing up thugs as cops? That's a new one." I nodded. Desperation makes fools bold. He gave me a long look. "What you did, standing calm, exposing them, not letting it turn ugly, that's what made the difference. If you'd lashed out, they'd have spun it against you. But you kept control. You reminded everyone what real strength looks like." I didn't say anything at first. Just let the wind rustle through the grass, let the silence sit. Then I finally answered, "Strength isn't about shouting the loudest. It's about standing steady when they try to knock you down." The sheriff smiled. "Couldn't have said it better myself." Before he left, he added, "You didn't just protect your ranch. You gave this community its backbone back. Folks are going to remember that." After he drove off, I sat on my porch with a glass of sweet tea, watching the horizon. His words stayed with me. I hadn't asked to be anyone's symbol, hadn't wanted to be the center of attention. But maybe this wasn't about me at all. Maybe it was about what happens when someone, anyone, refuses to bow. The truth is, that day wasn't just about fake cops or HOA power trips. It was about freedom. About the line every man and woman has to draw at some point. A line that says, "This far, no further." And if you're lucky, when you stand at that line, others will stand with you. That night, I wrote a letter to an old army buddy. Told him the whole story, from the fake badges to the sheriff hauling them off. I ended it with one simple line. Turns out, some battles don't happen overseas. Some happen in your own backyard. And just like before, we don't back down. As the days rolled into weeks, the HOA collapsed under lawsuits, resignations, and federal investigations. The impostors faced trial, their mugshots plastered across every news station. Justice moved slowly, but it moved. And me? I stayed right where I was. Working my land. Walking my fence line. Living free. The ranch felt different now, though, not because it had changed, but because I had defended it. Every blade of grass, every fence post, every ridge in the dirt seemed to stand taller, stronger, like it too had survived the storm. On quiet nights, when the stars burned bright above and the crickets sang their endless chorus, I'd think back to that morning when fake cops tried to claim what wasn't theirs. And I'd smile. Because they came with lies, with threats, with masks of authority. And they left with nothing but regret. That's the legacy of a stand well made. Not just for me, but for everyone who watched, remembered, and learned that you don't have to give in. Not to bullies. Not to frauds. Not to anyone who thinks they own your freedom. The HOA thought they could break me. Instead, they broke themselves. And out here on this land, on this soil I fought to keep, the truth stands tall. You don't raid a Green Beret's ranch and walk away victorious. You walk away exposed. You walk away defeated. You walk away regretting the day you ever tried.